Hey everyone, Joseph Devois here. Welcome to Power Shifts. And this week I've got a pretty big analysis for you that I've posted to the Substack. I'm going to try and walk you through it here on the podcast, but bear with me. It's a bit of a thick one today. And effectively, what I did is this week I analyzed 2 years worth of Pierre Poilievre speeches and videos and published to the Substack what they reveal about communicating with Canadians today. So while the polls may have softened a touch this week and the numbers otherwise, though, still indicate that Pierre Poilievre is going to be the next elected Prime Minister of Canada. And if you're in Canada, you've no doubt watched his rise over the last 3 years with interest. And if you're not Canadian, I'm guessing you've heard of him. His appearances on podcasts like Jordan Peterson has made him of interest to international audiences. His rise to conservative leadership and now his likely path to the Prime Minister's office has been built on relentless, disciplined messaging strategy that taps into something deep in the Canadian psyche. And while many political observers focus on his policies and what's he going to do once he's Prime Minister, which of course are all very fair and important questions, the real key to his success is how he speaks, how he frames issues, and how he makes complex ideas feel simple. So this week, I was in a meeting and a client asked me a pretty simple question and it gave me pause. And the question was this: how should organizations change their messaging in a Poilievre-led Canada? And my first instinct was to say, your DEI focus isn't going to work for you anymore. But if I'm honest with myself, that was a gut response, and I don't like giving answers on gut feel. So with the help of my friend Faisal at Interstellar Labs, Faisal is my AI Sifu, my AI guru. He's been helping me build out a lot of our AI tech stack solutions at Crestview Strategy. I sent him a quick little note, and I said, hey, I want to analyze 2 years worth of videos about delivered by Pierre Poilievre. Is there a way for us to do this easily? And within an hour, he built me a custom app that I was able to use to run this analysis. And what I found was obviously staggeringly consistent, a messaging playbook that has helped him reshape Canadian politics. And I think there's a lot here for professional communicators, obviously in Canada, but I think if you want to get a sense of how conservative movements around the world are evolving and how the most effective communicators in those movements are communicating, I think this is of interesting analysis. So let's get into it. First, a quick note on my source material. As I said, I pulled together 65 videos covering a 2-year period. And I focused on videos in which Pierre Poilievre is either giving a speech or explaining his policy positions. And my goal here was simple. I wanted to understand the language choices he makes when communicating with Canadians. And that's because he has proven to be an extremely effective communicator. His message recruited many first-time voters to his cause, many of them buying Conservative Party memberships so that they could vote for him as a new leader in 2022. So people who had never participated in the political process, let alone a leadership race before, were signing up in droves to vote for him. And that's, I think, because he was such a clear communicator. He had a message that was appealing to a body of people that otherwise were not politically engaged. And as a result, he won on the first ballot. And he won thanks to a massive commanding lead that he got as a result of recruiting these new party members. And he got there because his message felt fresh, it felt new, and different than what voters had become accustomed to at this point, whether it was from his predecessors or obviously from Prime Minister Trudeau. And his style has appeal to a large number of Canadians. His style has appealed to a large number of Canadians, yet at the same time, he also turns some Canadians off, especially what we call Laurentian elites, who do not understand his appeal. They can't understand how this guy's become popular. They're frustrated that his communication style, which they perceive to be excessively simple and caustic, is gaining any traction. But this is, we have to remember, a deliberate and calculated choice he has made. He's okay pissing off the Laurentian elites, and that's working for him because the more he does it, the more he's telegraphing a level of authenticity that he's on the side of a type of consumer, a type of voter, that wants to hear his style of message. So Let's see if we can explain his communication style and in the process learn what it takes to communicate effectively with Canadians right now. So I'm going to break this down in a couple different sections. We're going to talk about the core themes and what they mean. Then we'll talk about his hooks. From there, talk about his speaking style, review his power phrases, his emotional tone, some of the persuasion tactics he used, and what all of this means for you and your messaging. So as I say, this is a bit of a doozy. It's a big one. Let's get into it. So first, the core themes. While Poilievre may be in the middle of a messaging pivot to reflect Canadians' sudden rally around the flag thanks to Trump's tariff threats, the fundamentals of what has driven a massive revolt away from Trudeau and away from the Liberal Party, and in return, an embrace of Poilievre, especially from many newly engaged Canadians, is clear in the core themes that Poilievre focuses on. And of course, the big umbrella theme that he's now focused on, but I think it's sort of the pillar that drives everything now, is a theme around Canada first, prioritizing Canadian interests and sovereignty in all policy decisions. And this includes prioritizing Canadian interests in trade, as well as rebuilding national pride and identity. Underneath this main core theme, we have then some supporting themes, and they are around economic prosperity, security and law and order, and parental rights and freedom. So let's dig down into each of these a little bit more detailed. On economic prosperity, here he's focusing on tax cuts, reduce regulations, and resource development to stimulate economic growth and create jobs. And then there are some sub-themes in this category, and some of these are language choices, obviously, but you've got axe the tax. And this was obviously constantly presented as a key policy idea in the last 2 years, to axe the carbon tax, of course. And it's been impossible to get through a Poilievre speech without hearing this slogan until very recently. So that's a core plank of the economic prosperity. The other is build the homes. It's a simple refrain to address housing affordability and supply. Next, we got fix the budget, a simple construct for talking about fiscal responsibility, reducing deficits, and government waste. Think about how simple some of these language choices are. Axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget. Each of those are 3 words. They're punchy, they're vivid, they're clear. And that includes the final sub-theme in this category, bring home production, which is a clear way to talk about creating jobs and incentivizing domestic production. This theme, economic prosperity, is the most frequent theme that Poilievre speaks to. And it's not a surprise given his regular focus on tax cuts, housing, jobs, and affordability. Next, we've got security, law, and order. And in this theme, we're focused on strengthening border controls, combating drug trafficking, and enacting stricter penalties for criminals to ensure public safety. There's 3 sub-themes here in this one. Again, listen to these themes. 3 words, crisp, clean, and simple. Stop the crime, tough on crime, secure the borders. So stop the crime. In those 3 words, you know exactly what he means. Tough on crime, this is contrast language. It's intended to highlight the difference between the Liberals and his approach. And his approach, stricter penalties, especially for repeat offenders and fentanyl traffickers. And securing the borders is obviously something we're seeing a lot more of in response to the Trump tariff threat. But again, these 3 words are all it takes for him to convey a message around preventing illegal immigrants, drug trafficking, and gun smuggling. So security and law and order is the second most frequent theme that Poilievre touches on. And given what life looks like in many urban and suburban parts of Canada, I have no doubt that these issues are topics of concern and that they show up unprompted in a lot of focus groups that him and his team are probably running right now. I want to share with you a common refrain he uses so you get a sense of the tone and timbre of these things. And when he talks about drug traffickers, this is the language he uses. He says, "We must stop drugs to save our people and put Canada first. It starts with locking up mass traffickers and manufacturers of this poison with penalties that reflect the crime." Locking up mass traffickers, right? It's such a vivid, clear image that he's able to portray in such few words, and it allows him to drive his point and drive it very well. The third theme, sub-theme, the core theme that Pierre focuses on is parental rights and freedom. And here he's emphasizing parental authority in education and opposing government overreach into personal decisions. And there are three sub-themes here. They touch on education, drug policy, and family structure. On education, he's talking about concerns about what is being taught in schools and who should determine the curriculum, including specific worries about gender ideology being imposed on children without parental consent. On drug policy, he talks about, or he shares concerns that government drug policies are endangering children and undermining parental authority. And on family structure, he speaks of the importance of family and parental involvement in raising children. And he's got this line I find rather compelling that he uses. Again, listen to how vivid this language is. And so rather than just talking about the drug problem as a problem, he says, our children will not die in back alleys. That's the charter right I will uphold. All right, so clear. You don't want to picture your own child stuck in dead in an alleyway. And he has no fears about drawing on that imagery to make his point. So pay attention to these themes. They are calibrated for the current political climate in Canada, and I suspect these themes are resilient. And I see no reason for these core themes to change much over the next 12 months, as they are flexible enough to adapt to public opinion swings on specific policy priorities. You can see how it's possible in a post-tariff world for Pierre Poilievre to continue to touch on these themes and be relevant. So no matter the swing, most of what will consume the public's political attention fits within the core themes that he's touching on. Why do I think he's going to stick to these themes? Well, because of the level of repetition with which he has spoken to them and on a variety of topics. These themes work whether he's talking about economic issues, foreign policy challenges, trade wars, or social concerns. He's able to bridge back to these themes. And the Canada First theme is very potent right now, and frankly, I think always has been. It taps into national pride and a desire for self-reliance, which Canadians are suddenly attuned to. And the emphasis on economic prosperity and law and order lets Poilievre focus on the issues that made him resonate in the first place. Affordability issues are not improving anytime soon, and it remains an emotionally compelling reason for people to vote for change. So there we are. Those are the core themes. Now I want to look at Poilievre's hooks. What would it take to capture your audience's attention the way Poilievre does? Well, here is the recipe he uses, and there are 5 parts to it. Number 1, address the audience and your opponents directly. He'll use language like, my message to the Liberal government, and then he delivers his message. This creates a sense of urgency. It makes the message personal and impactful. So that's number 1. He addresses the audience and his opponents directly. Number 2, he uses strong emotional language and vivid imagery. He doesn't just talk about crime. He talks about mass murder, bullets into a crowd, burying her face in her hands when he's talking about an aggrieved mother. And in so doing, he evokes strong feelings of anger, fear, and empathy, making the topic much more compelling for his audience to pay attention to. So that's number 2. Number 3, he creates a clear enemy in the villain. Poilievre names names. For example, he talks about mass traffickers, fentanyl kingpins, Carney Trudeau liberals. This helps him simplify the issue, and it directs blame towards a specific target, making it easier for his audience to understand and support his proposals. So that's 3. Number 4, he offers simple, concrete solutions. It's not enough for Poilievre to talk about stopping crime. He also talks about the solutions. Mandatory prison sentences, life sentences, etc. And by focusing on the practical, he provides a sense of hope and direction, assuring his audience that he has a plan to address the problem. 5, contrast the current negative with positive visions of the future. I love contrast as a communications device, as a tool. It is so effective. And you see and hear it when Poilievre talks about everything being broken versus bringing home the country we know or we knew and love. And this also creates a sense of urgency for change. So if you ever write a policy note for his government, you may want to consider these hooks right in this style, and you'll be speaking his language. His techniques are effective because he simplifies complex issues, appeals to emotions, and offers clear solutions, which then makes his message persuasive and memorable. So these hooks create a compelling narrative that resonates with many Canadians and motivates them to support his agenda. So just to close us out on these, here are the hooks. As a reminder, number one, address the audience and your opponents directly. Number two, use strong emotional language and vivid imagery. Number three, create a clear enemy or a villain. Number four, offer simple, concrete solutions. And number five, contrast the current negative with positive visions of the future. Okay, we've talked themes, we've talked hooks. Now let's talk about speaking style. Every speaker has a formula that they rely on to communicate. And few political communicators are innovative in their style, but with the right formula, the right combination of traits, some land their message more effectively. And I think obviously Pierre has proven that he is rather effective at this. And here's a formula he relies on. 5 parts to it. 1, use of anecdotes and personal stories. 2, repetition and parallelism. 3, emotional appeals and strong language. 4, direct and assertive tone. 5, clear articulation of policy positions. This formula contributes to a compelling and persuasive speaking style. And the reason for that is that anecdotes create a connection and relatability. Repetition reinforces key messages and enhances memorability. Emotional appeals and strong language evoke a passion and a conviction, driving the audience to feel the urgency of the issues. And a direct tone conveys confidence and decisiveness, which then assures the audience of his leadership and his capabilities. And of course, a clear articulation of policy positions provides concrete solutions and demonstrates competence in preparedness to govern. So there we are. That is his speaking style formula. Let's take a look at some of his power phrases. So phrases sort of stuck out in our analysis of being very emotional, very evocative, very vivid. And so power phrases are short, they're impactful statements, they're used in political speeches and communications to drive a point, to evoke emotions, to make a message more memorable, and they are designed to be clear, concise, persuasive, often incorporating rhetorical devices like repetition or contrast or metaphors. And here are the power phrases Poilievre has made his own. Here, I'm going to read the context of where the phrase comes in, and then of course I'll just make sure I highlight for you the actual power phrase itself. So the full context, the full quote goes like this: "It should not take a foreign leader to get the Liberals to wake up to the drug crisis that they have caused here at home. It should have been enough that we lost 50,000 of our people. We should crack down on drugs, not to please President Trump, but to ensure that," and here's a power phrase, "to ensure that not one more mother has to bury her face in her hands on learning that her son has died of an overdose in a back alley somewhere." How powerful is that? The imagery, the cadence, the language. I think it's one of his key power phrases, and I think it's a pretty new one, actually. Here's the next. And the 3 of the 4 power phrases I have for you, of course, are all touching on crime, and so no surprise, right? It's an issue. Drug trafficking is an issue that resonates with people at an emotional level. So here's his next one, and he says, "Let's call fentanyl trafficking what it is. Mass murder selling 40 milligrams of this poison is enough to kill 20 people." And here's the power phrase: "It's like spraying bullets into a crowd. You might not know you're killing, but it's certain someone will die." Again, he's not afraid to go there. He's not afraid to draw that image for you. It's a violent image, but he's capturing your attention. He's drawing a metaphor here that allows you to understand the crisis that we're dealing with in a different way. And there's a level of authenticity and clarity about that I think makes this one of his power phrases. All right, here's another power phrase. It's at the end of the quote, so here we go. "It starts with locking up mass traffickers and manufacturers of this poison with penalties that reflect the crime. But what is that crime? Let's call fentanyl trafficking what it is: mass murder. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key." So simple. That's the solution for how we deal with these guys. Make sure they get big, proper prison sentences and make sure they don't get released into the general public again. Of course, I've just complicated that language. That's how I would say it if I was at a policy think tank discussion. But he makes this so clear. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key. And then finally, one of the final paraphrase I have for you here is one I think you're going to hear often in the next couple months. Which is this concept around, and the paraphrase reads as follows: we're going to bring home the country we knew and love. It's so nostalgic, right? So these phrases are effective because they evoke strong emotional responses. They paint vivid pictures. The first one we talked about, where he draws the story of the mother not having to bury her face upon learning that her son has died of an overdose in an alley. It uses powerful image of grief to personalize the drug crisis. While the second, when he talks about that fentanyl traffickers, the equivalent of people coming into a crowd and shooting up, he compares fentanyl trafficking to a random act of violence, and that escalates the perceived severity of the crime. He makes it important for us all to pay attention to. The third, where he talks about locking up fentanyl traffickers and throwing away the key, is memorable soundbite because it promises decisive action. And of course, the last one, we're going to bring home the country we knew and love, is a nostalgic appeal to restore a sense of national identity and security. And so combine these power phrases, they enhance his message by making it way more relatable, impactful, and memorable. Okay, so we've talked about power phrases. Now let's talk about emotional tone, because politics is not just about the facts. It's not just about logic. It's not about policy. It's about how people feel about issues, about candidates, and about movements. And the right emotional tone can mobilize supporters. It can persuade undecided voters, and it can make opponents look out of touch. And here's the emotional tone Poilievre has leaned into over the last 2 years. So this, to me, is a very important section because he does not get the traction he's getting unless he is mirroring what people are feeling on the streets. So this is a reflection of the psyche of the Canadian public right now. So his emotional tone is outrage, urgency, hope, determination, and patriotism. Outrage fuels the condemnation of the status quo. That's important in what will clearly be a change election. Urgency underscores the need for immediate action. It gives him a sense of purpose for why he needs to act right away. Hope offers a vision of a better future. And this is important in future leaders and prime ministers. They do have to have some element of hope to their vision. All right. If it's all doom and gloom, you're not necessarily going to mobilize people to come out and vote for you. So hope is an important aspect of his emotional tone. Determination conveys his commitment to change. Patriotism emphasizes the importance of prioritizing the nation, of putting Canada first. And these emotions combined do not work unless they reflect what Canadians are feeling right now. So I think it's very important for you as you think about how you communicate with the public right now, whether you have dialed yourself into this frequency. Do you understand how Canadians are feeling right now? Because that ultimately has a massive impact on how they perceive your message and your way of delivering it. Okay, so we talked about emotional tone. Now let's talk about persuasion tactics. So whether by design or by accident, political communicators often go back to the well and they use communications tactics that have been proven effective at the art or the science, depending how you want to look at it, of persuasion. So here's how Poilievre persuades. There are 4 aspects to his sort of arsenal of persuasion tactics. First is an appeal to fear. He uses vivid imagery, alarming statistics related to drug overdoses, crime, and economic instability to create a sense of urgency and anxiety. This can create a deep desire from his audience, from Canadians, to seek solutions, which of course he always then presents. And I think that's the core, what makes it important. He cannot just simply appeal to fear. He needs to put the solution in the window, and he always does. But fear is a strong motivator. So if you can unlock that first and then put your solution in the window, you are speaking to a mind that's very receptive to your message. So that's the first one, appeal to fear. The second is the concept around us versus them. He is not shy to establish a clear divide between us being Canadians, common sense conservatives, and them being liberals, the NDP, Trudeau, foreign entities like China, criminals. And this creates in-group loyalty and out-group animosity, making Poilievre's solutions more appealing by framing them as actions against the enemy. And of course, that has always served as an effective rallying cry. Next, in his arsenal of persuasion tactics is bandwagon. There's a constant emphasis on there's a constant emphasis on the growing dissatisfaction with the current government and the claim that everyone feels this way. And by talking about how everyone feels this way, or at least leaving that impression, it creates a bandwagon effect by suggesting that Poilievre's views are the popular and inevitable choice. And people are naturally inclined to align with the perceived majority. So that's bandwagon. And the last tool in his persuasion toolbox is simplification. Complex issues like drug addiction, economic policy, and international trade are reduced to easily digestible sound bites and slogans. Axe the tax, build the homes, jail, not bail. This simplifies a problem and the solution, making it easier for Canadians to understand and support, even if the reality is much more nuanced than he's presenting. But he is a master at swaying opinions, tapping into basic human emotions and cognitive biases. So pay attention to these. You may want to consider how you use them. So what does all of this mean for your messaging? It's a lot of analysis. I'm going to try and close this out here, hopefully make sense of all of this. And I've broken it down into three different sort of scenarios. And the first is if you are an advocacy group, or you work at an advocacy group, or you represent one. And here, I think the wrong message, you got to be careful. If you don't have the right message, you're going to get shut out. And the right message will get you a seat at the table eventually. So you got to start asking yourself, and I'm sure you're already doing this, but continue to ask yourself, how can you frame your issue in a way that aligns with Poilievre's Canada First positioning? Okay, so that's if you're an advocacy group. What if you're a business leader? Well, his economic rhetoric is built around production, not abstraction. So how can you talk about your industry in terms of jobs, affordability, making life easier for Canadians? So that's your assignment for how you think about how you communicate on your issues. And finally, if you're in public affairs, you are at risk of playing with an outdated playbook. So what worked with the Trudeau government obviously is not going to work now with the new government. So how do you ensure your language doesn't come across as elite speak? I think there's an entire Bible of terminology and words that you've probably come accustomed to using, a certain lexicon that worked with the previous government, and it's going to land with a total thud if you're using it with Pierre Poilievre's government. So the political winds in Canada are shifting. He's not just winning on ideas, he's winning on message clarity. He's winning on contrast, and he's winning on emotional appeal. So the question to me isn't whether to adapt, it's a question of how. So if you're crafting messages in a Poilievre-led Canada, you got to ask yourself, is your language sharp, simple, and clear? Are you using contrast to drive your point? And are you tapping into the emotions that your audience already feels? Because in this political reality, those who fail to adapt their communication styles are going to struggle to be persuasive. They'll struggle to be heard at all, especially if they're trying to engage a new prime minister, and if that new prime minister's name is Pierre Poilievre. There we are, a long one today. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. You can capture this. You can read this in more detail at my Substack. Powershifts.pro is the URL. I'll probably I'm gonna break down some of this analysis into even more bite-sized pieces over the next week or two. So stay tuned. I may be back with some additional analysis in the next week.